The charity gala glittered with crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, and the laughter of the city's wealthiest families. Luxury cars lined the entrance, while photographers captured every famous face. Arriving at the annual Children's Hope Foundation fundraiser, it was the kind of event where millionaires wrote six-figure checks without blinking, and where every guest carefully guarded their reputation. Among the waitstaff, quietly serving drinks, was a young woman named Emily Carter. She had worked double shifts for nearly 2 years, saving every dollar to care for her 8-year-old son, Noah. Few people noticed her to the guests. She was simply another waitress blending into the background. Around her neck, pinned carefully to her uniform, was an old silver brooch shaped like a soaring swallow. It wasn't expensive, in fact. The silver had faded and one tiny blue stone was missing. But Emily treated it as if it were priceless. It had been the last gift from her late husband, Daniel. At least that was what she believed. As Emily walked between tables offering champagne, an elderly billionaire suddenly froze. Richard Harrison, the founder of Harrison Global Industries. One of the richest men in the country. His hand trembled as he stared directly at the small silver brooch. He stepped forward so quickly that several guests turned to watch. "Where did you get that brooch?" he asked, his voice unusually sharp. Emily blinked. "I'm sorry." "The brooch," Richard repeated, pointing at it. "Where did it come from?" Emily instinctively touched it. "It belonged to my husband." Richard's face became pale. "That brooch belongs to my son." The ballroom fell silent nearby. Conversation stopped. Guests exchanged confused glances. Emily shook her head. "There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake," Richard said firmly. "I had this custom made 29 years ago. Only two existed, one for me and one for my son." A murmur spread through the room. Emily suddenly felt everyone's eyes on her. "My husband died 8 years ago," she whispered. Richard stared at her. "What was his name?" "Daniel Carter." Richard looked as though someone had stolen the air from his lungs. "No," his voice cracked. "My son's name was Daniel Harrison." The room exploded with whispers. Emily felt dizzy. "No. My husband wasn't rich." Richard slowly shook his head. "He disappeared 28 years ago." Emily could barely breathe. "My Daniel was raised in foster care." Richard closed his eyes. "So was my son." The silence became unbearable. Richard asked gently, "Would you come with me?" "There are questions that need answers." Although frightened, Emily agreed. Inside a quiet private lounge, Richard called his longtime attorney and his family historian. Boxes of old documents arrived within 30 minutes. Richard opened a worn leather album. Inside were photographs taken nearly 3 decades earlier. One picture showed a smiling little boy wearing the exact same silver swallow brooch. Emily covered her mouth. The resemblance was unmistakable. The boy had Daniel's eyes, his smile, even the tiny scar above his eyebrow. Richard began telling a story he had buried for decades. When Daniel was 4 years old, the Harrison family attended a charity festival. During the crowded celebration, Daniel vanished despite the largest private search in state history. No trace of him was ever found. Police believed he had been kidnapped. Years passed. Investigators followed hundreds of false leads. Eventually, they declared the case unsolved. Richard's wife never recovered from losing their son. She died believing Daniel had died too. Richard never stopped searching. Every year on Daniel's birthday, he donated millions to children's organizations, hoping another family would never experience such pain. Emily listened through tears. "My husband remembered almost nothing before age 5, she said quietly. "He always said his earliest memories were blurry." Richard leaned forward. "Did he ever mention a necklace? A stuffed bear, anything?" Emily nodded slowly. "He talked about a blue teddy bear." Richard immediately covered his face. Daniel's favorite toy had been a blue teddy bear. The room became silent again. DNA testing was arranged immediately. The following days felt endless. Emily returned to work. Richard returned to his business empire. Neither could think about anything else. Finally, the results arrived. The attorney opened the sealed envelope. Richard read the first page. His hands began shaking. Tears filled his eyes. "The DNA confirms it." He looked toward Emily. "Daniel was my son," Emily cried openly. Richard did too. 2 strangers connected forever by one man they had both loved. But the story wasn't over. Richard requested every available record from Daniel's foster history. Private investigators worked around the clock. What they discovered shocked everyone. Daniel had never been abandoned. He had been sold 28 years earlier. A corrupt employee working security at the festival had kidnapped Daniel. The child was secretly sold to an illegal adoption broker, operating across several states. The criminals changed his identity before placing him into the foster system. Most of those responsible had already died or disappeared, but one woman remained alive, Margaret Lewis. She had worked for the illegal adoption ring. When investigators confronted her with evidence, she finally confessed she admitted taking Daniel from the festival because she believed wealthy parents could simply have another child. She claimed she never imagined Richard Harrison would spend his entire life. Searching the confession made national headlines. News channels covered the heartbreaking reunion. People across the country mourned the years that had been stolen from Daniel. But Richard refused to focus only on the past. He wanted to honor the son he had finally found. He visited Daniel's modest grave with Emily and little Noah. For nearly an hour, nobody spoke. Richard gently placed fresh white lilies beside the headstone. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I searched every day." Emily placed the silver brooch beside the flowers for a moment, before pinning it back onto her jacket. "It stayed with him until the very end," she said softly. Richard smiled through tears. He never forgot who he truly was, even if he didn't know it. Over the next few months, Richard became part of Noah's life. The little boy had never known his grandfather. Now he suddenly had one who wanted nothing more than to make up for lost time. Richard attended Noah's school performances. He helped him build model airplanes. He taught him how to fish. Most importantly, he listened whenever Noah talked about his dreams. One afternoon, Noah asked, "Grandpa, was my dad brave?" Richard smiled, "The bravest man I've ever known." Emily noticed something remarkable. Despite his unimaginable wealth, Richard never tried to replace Daniel. He simply shared stories. Stories of the little boy Daniel once was. Stories Emily had never heard. Together, they slowly pieced together an entire lifetime. A few months later, Richard announced a surprise during a major press conference. Instead of discussing business profits, he revealed the Daniel Harrison Foundation. The organization would search for missing children, support foster families, and provide free DNA testing for adults searching for biological relatives. Reporters asked why he was investing nearly $1 billion into the foundation. Richard simply removed the silver swallow brooch from his pocket. Emily had gifted it to him after having a replica made, holding it before the cameras. He answered quietly, "Because one small piece of silver reunited a broken family." His words spread across social media worldwide. Thousands shared stories of relatives they had lost. Several cold cases were reopened after families came forward with new evidence. The foundation reunited dozens of children with biological parents. During its first year alone, Emily often visited the headquarters. In the entrance hall stood a glass display. Inside rested the original silver swallow brooch. Beneath it was a simple message: "Hope is never too old to find its way home." Visitors frequently stopped there with tears in their eyes. Many had experienced similar heartbreak. Others simply realized how precious family truly was. Years later, Noah graduated from college. Richard proudly watched from the front row. As Noah accepted his diploma, he wore a small silver swallow brooch on his jacket. The audience noticed the symbol immediately. Many already knew its incredible story. After the ceremony, Noah hugged his grandfather. "I wish Dad could see this." Richard smiled gently. "I think he can." Emily looked toward the bright afternoon sky. She remembered the frightened waitress who had walked into a charity gala, believing she was invisible. She had no idea that one tiny brooch carried the truth of an entire lifetime. A truth hidden for nearly 3 decades. A truth powerful enough to heal generations of grief. Sometimes the smallest object holds the biggest secret. Sometimes a single, forgotten keepsake carries the answers that millions of dollars, endless investigations, and years of searching cannot uncover. And sometimes when hope seems completely lost, love quietly finds its way back home through the most unexpected miracle of all.